Good afternoon, and good to see you. My name is Greg Niemeyer. I'm a professor of art practice at UC Berkeley, and I'm so thrilled to be teaching the course Visual Cultures with Edgar Fabian Frias and with Hala Kadura, our amazing GSIs, as well as with Paris Coates, and with our amazing guest lecturer for today, Clancy Wilmott. Our lecture series and course is really about becoming familiar with critical thinking about a wide range of visual artifacts. And certainly maps are one of the things we spend a lot of time looking at, especially with computer-guided navigation. So it's a very important and current topic, but it also is a topic with deep historical roots. So I'm really excited about the lecture today. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention, if anybody's new to this series, please use your Q&A button on the center below, on the menu bar below, in the middle, to pose questions, and Edgar and Hala will pull out some of the questions as time permits to present to our speaker at the end of the lecture. We also have a chat feature that we like to look at and comment on, so if you have any thoughts as we go along through the lecture and that you'd like to share with everybody, please use the chat. And with that, I wanted to mention the topic that we had preceding this lecture is representing utopias. And so students in this course are going to, following Clancy's lecture, consider how to make an original map that facilitates navigation in a utopia, dystopia, or dream world. And an example of that would be UC Blockly, which is a virtual copy of UC Berkeley that students at UC Berkeley created when they realized that COVID was going to be preventing us from going to campus and doing our normal things for a very long time. So this is a map of the campus created in Minecraft that actually turned into a simulation of campus and in a way into a substitution of campus. And it's good there. It's always beautiful and never rains, and you can always meet new people, but of course it's not real. So that being said, let's go on to the introduction itself. Clancy Wilmott is a assistant professor in the Department of Geography at UC Berkeley, a very fine institution indeed. And Clancy actually joined us fairly recently, and we're really thrilled to have her here. And one of my favorite aspects of her is her title, Critical Cartographer. Critical Cartographer Clancy Wilmott recasts maps as geometries of power that carry out a form of visual imperialism. In this talk, she builds on research from her book, Mobile Mapping, the first in-depth discussion of how specific geographic and historical conditions shape the way in which we read, work, and leverage mobile phone maps in daily life. Topics include the importation of cartographic aesthetics from imperial centers to peripheral landscapes, and the various visual productions and resistances that appear, including counter-mapping, hand-drawn maps, and map-based art. Clancy Wilmott is an assistant professor in the geography department and has research interests including critical cartography, media geographies, critical GIS and data studies, cultural memory and landscape politics of representation, textuality and visuality, digitalities, lived, made, and inherited. With that, I'd like to give Clancy a warm round of welcome applause, and I'd like to point out that Clancy is actually joining us from the UK, from London. So Clancy, what does it feel like being a late night TV host tonight?
I'm slowly getting used to it. I think I just shift my whole time zone from one place to the other, which kind of, makes a point about Australia that I'm going to discuss a little bit later. But yeah, it's fun. But shall I share my screen?
Yeah, please do. But before you do, I wanted to see if you have anything on your desk that we could bond with, that you could share with us, so we know what it looks like behind your camera. Because we only can see your face, but of course you're in a room with a desk, and what's in there? We're so curious.
Well, I've got a very fancy microphone that I use because I'm always worried that people can't understand my Australian accent. But most importantly, I think this kind of speaks to what it's like being a late night host in the UK. Is this tiny little I don't know if you can see a little troll doll that we made when the pandemic first started. We made, her name's Helga, a little outfit and a little mask to protect her from catching the COVID-19 disease. I think we're in lockdown at the moment, a full lockdown, so it's kind of apropos.
Yeah, very much so. I'm hope that Helga stays safe, and you too. And I'm glad she's wearing the required protections as we all should. And, in this country, we're struggling with that concept. So maybe we should send a few Helgas over to our country. The United States would be helpful. Anyways, with that, let's get started. Let's look at your slides, and we'll do about 40 minutes of lectures, and then of your lecture, and then we'll switch to question and answer mode. So onwards, let's do it. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
No worries, it's my pleasure. I'm really excited. Let me just do this. I have no idea where my screen has just gone.
Did you make it full screen?
No, I've actually clicked something and I don't know what it is.
Today's a funny day.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Let me just check. Start share. Here we go. Okay.
You got it. Excellent.
I got it. My usual menu at the top disappeared because I minimized. So what I will do is I'll move this down here. Okay, so I am doing a desktop presentation today. So I'm actually going to be moving around through my desktop, showing you different bits and pieces from different sources, because I tend to, in my own work, bring together a lot of different resources, a lot of different tools, etc. So I wanted to give you a bit of a sense of that. So today's discussion, what I want to talk about today is called Green Parks, Red Dust. And this, I suppose, work in progress, and a series of thinking that I'm doing at the moment, originates from a series of interviews I did in 2014, sort of end of 2013, beginning of 2014, in Sydney and Hong Kong, but specifically in Sydney. And I want to start by showing you a small video here. There's sort of two moments that really captured what, I suppose, a series of new questions that I hadn't really considered. So this video here this is Sarah. And Sarah is a young Wiradjuri woman who actually grew up north of Sydney, not in her country, about maybe 10 hours drive north of Sydney. And she moved to Sydney for university. And we're walking through this place in Sydney called Hyde Park, which is named after the park in London. And as you can see, it's a really ordered, fairly green park. And she's talking about the way in which this space isn't really a natural landscape. It's not really a space that has formed naturally on the Australian landscape, but instead resembles this very landscape architecture aesthetic that was really predominant in 19th century Europe. And what's interesting is, I suppose, in this particular place, it's got a main avenue that runs through it. You've got a bunch of Port Jackson figs. So these are native Australian trees mixing with a really rather large number of imported plants. And this is a festival that's happening. At the moment, there's a large Stonehenge. I think I can show you the Stonehenge. That's actually an artwork by Jeremy Deller that people can jump on. And she talks about the way in which this park, and there's a statue of Lieutenant Cook just off behind the jumping castle. She talks about the way in which this leads to disquiet for her, that this space has been basically built over what was there before. She talks about the way throughout Sydney there are different sacred sites that are secret, so they're burial grounds. We don't know where they are, and that this space has kind of been implanted on the landscape. The next video I want to show you is an interview I did.
Clancy, this is great. I just want to let you know that the video doesn't really play like a video, it plays more like a slideshow. And so if you turn on sharing and select optimize for video, it'll do a better job. But if it doesn't really matter for your purposes, it's fine. We just see like every 10th frame or so. Yeah,
that's cool. Okay. It doesn't really matter so much. Okay. So this interview happened about 10 days later. And I'm talking to Ben here. And Ben, when he decided to go for a walk, wanted to go to this place, this park here, Camperdown Park. So this is a screenshot of my phone. He wanted to go to Camperdown Park because he wanted to go and sit in a park and discuss various ideas that he had around architecture. He's an artist. And when we got to the park, this is him having stopped, he realized that even though the park on this map was this really, I suppose, luscious green, when we arrived, it's actually, it's in the middle of summer, so it's probably on that day about 38 degrees. It's hot. As you can see, the grass is quite brown. The trees are really scraggly, and there's a lot of sports fields. There's not a lot of shade. And in parks like this in Australia, as you can see, it's not very nice to sit in the shade. And these patches are actually often covered in different kinds of sort of bark and leaves, twigs, and also pretty nasty ants as well that like to eat you. And when we get to this park, Ben says to me, he goes, I was hoping it would be more sort of like trees and less sort of like sports grounds. And I think for me, these two interviews, these two conversations together, I'll show you a little bit more of the park, kind of encapsulate this problem, this promise of, or this hope within the Australian landscape of a certain kind of order, a certain kind of visual imaginary, and the disappointment that you feel when those landscapes fail to live up to expectations that have been set in a place 20,000 kilometers away, like London, and also at the same time then denounce, or I suppose erase, what those landscapes actually are and how they could actually be. And so this talk that I've titled Green Parks, Red Dust, it's about this particular tension. And I think for me, this tension is really encapsulated, particularly for those in the audience who are not familiar with the Australian context, in these two pieces of writing. So the first one on the left by Dorothea McKellar, who is a wealthy, well-educated young woman. She's writing this poem, which is one of the most famous Australian poems, I suppose, in 1908 from London. And she's feeling fairly homesick. And this poem where she sort of talks about this love of field and coppice, of green and shaded lanes, of ordered woods and gardens is running in your veins. Strong love of grey blue distance, brown streams and soft dim skies. I know but cannot share it, my love is otherwise. And then this line, I love a sunburnt country, a land of sweeping plains, of ragged mountain ranges, of droughts and flooding rains. I love her far horizons, I love her jewel sea, her beauty and her terror, wide brown land for me. And this particular poem, she's really hitting at this problem within the understanding of Australian landscape, artistically, but also culturally, and this constant tension between a very European and very British imagination of landscape. And you can see that in the kinds of colours that she describes about these green and shaded lanes. And then the harshness of the Australian landscape, that is not a lush kind of space. It is very intense. It is very brown and red. The greens are much more muted. It's this very different kinds of space. And for me,
Clancy, one second. Maybe you have to share the browser only, because the way we see the text, it looks like a really interesting pixel map, but it's not easy to read at all. So,
okay.
So or that's better. Yes, better already. But
Yeah.
It still looks a little weird. I don't know why.
It shouldn't.
Yeah, it's okay. It's better now, much better now. Thank you. Go on.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Keep telling me if it's not working.
I will. Sorry to interrupt.
So this is the kind of writing that she discusses. But on the other side, there's a quote from Stan Grant, who's also a Wiradjuri man, from the I2Q debate in 2015. And he talks about this poem in particular. And he writes, it reminds me that my people were killed on those plains. We were shot on those plains. Diseases ravaged us on those plains. And I think this quote intersects into this problem with the Australian imagination, where it is bound up with histories of colonialism and of genocidal violence that are still very much unsettled and still very much unfinished. And I would also argue that there are these tensions are actually, until we resolve this question of colonialism, this question of treaty, this question of what the Australian landscape means and what has happened on it, and also very much who owns it, then this continual tension between, on one hand, a very blue geographic imagination, or a very blue visual imagination, and a very red and brown sunburnt reality will continue on. So before I get onto my, let's say, practice, I want to just quickly clear up and I suppose foreground this a little bit more rather than me just telling you and show you. And the two terms that I use in the title, visual imperialism and the cartographic imagination, I want to just explain a little bit more what I mean by that. So, visual imperialism. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with early Australian art or even early Australian mapping. I think for me, well, not for me, generally, when you go to the documentation, you see these early descriptions of Australia, colour plays this important role continuously in the attempted description of the landscape. So this is a series of quotes from William Bradley, who was a surveyor aboard the First Fleet, and he was reading Lieutenant Cook's diaries and using those diaries to basically navigate up the east coast of Australia to try and figure out where Botany Bay is. And he writes that Captain Cook has named this point called Red Point because it is red, and that you know, there are two little islands near it, and that actually afterwards, so the day afterwards, there's a series of white cliffs that come up the hills, and these white cliffs are basically the sign that you're about to reach Botany Bay. And he argues that it's not a very good description because there's a lot of different white cliffs that show like sand hills that come up the cliffs, because the sand in Australia is actually, it can range from a very white color to a very gold color depending on the rock formation. And to show, yeah.
Sorry, one more thing about resolution. So we're getting intel from Jafinma Power. She says you're still using the video setting, but now you're just showing still slides, and that's why it's blurry. So maybe you can reset your share screen to not enhance it for video, optimize for video, and then we can read all the text and see all the details again. And
okay.
then we'll be good. Yes, so much better. Oh my goodness. Yes. I feel like
Can you see these?
Now it's all good. Yes, now it's all good.
Yeah,
but, yeah,
great. So I'll go back quickly to this. So again, this question of red point, you know, the land forming the point is very white. What is a white cliff versus a white sand hill? How do we describe the landscape? And this is really evident in, I'm just going to keep this chat up so people can keep telling me if it's not working. So this is really evident in some of the early descriptions or the early images of Australia. So this is an image by Thomas Mitchell of the Blue Mountains, which is just west of Sydney. I don't know why this is here. And so this is actually an image of the Blue Mountains, and it's extremely green. Like I can zoom in here and you can see just how green it is. Can you see this? And again, from what we've seen of the Australian landscape already in the videos, it's overstated. So this particular landscape is overstated, but of course, someone like Thomas Mitchell, who's publishing this in 1839, has been taught how to draw and to sketch according to an English landscape tradition. And so you get these really early on, very green images of the landscape, as well as pastoral scenes, etc. Similarly, you kind of get these images as well. Again, trying to experiment with this question of red-brown as well. And so this one is a little bit later. It's sort of 1833. And you're getting these shifting colors as well, this kind of redness. But if you compare the difference, you can see, and I'll zoom in a bit here so you can really begin to see. So you can see these attempts at trying to match this colour in Australian art. But of course, and going back to here, the question of, whoa. There we go. The question of cartographic imagination, I'm going to just share that straight up. My slides are blocking that, but that's fine. The question of cartographic imagination is a little bit different to art. It's a little bit different to this question of art, because cartography isn't art in the traditional sense. It is something that's much more scientific, something that's much more about observing the landscape and then describing it and simplifying it so that you can get information that perhaps you wouldn't necessarily be able to see, or that you can actually make decisions, or as Greg said, you can navigate through that space. And I think that's one of the key things that I want to think about as well, not just cartography or color in cartography, like color in cartography just as an artistic element, but color in cartography as a cartographic element as well. And cartography, particularly in the 17th and 18th centuries, or let's say the 18th and 19th centuries, is a much more, it's a universal force. So cartography aims to be readable to as many people as possible. You don't want a map that only a few people can read unless you're creating that for a very specific purpose. And so what you get with cartographic traditions are what I would call homogenizing forces. So they reduce the landscape into very clear classifications, very clear categorizations, depict that so that, and this is what Franco Farinelli describes, it's not just a descriptive element, but so that people can use these maps, these images, to then reason and build, so they can make decisions based upon that. So these like depictions of the landscape aren't just about proposing one way that you could view the world, but actually creating a foundation or a structure upon which we can then act. And when we look at some of the early maps of Australia, I'm going to share this here. So this is an early map. So this is probably the earliest map of Australia by a convict as part of the settlement. So this is one of the first settlement maps of Australia. So you can see here it's the 16th of April, 1788. And it's by Francis Folkes, who was a convict aboard the first fleet. And so Australia was settled on January the 26th, 1788. So this is less than 4 months afterwards. And you can see folks trying to come to terms with the landscape here as well. And for what it's worth, this is not really what the landscape looks like at all. And I could probably, if I want to be a little bit risky, open QuickTime Player and show you what it looks like. Hopefully this will be my phone and not me. Yeah, and so this is what it looks like. So this is actually Sydney Cove here. And it's been built out a fair bit, so you can see it here. But it doesn't look anything like that. I think it's always really quite telling that for someone who has been, I suppose, shipped to the other side of the world involuntarily as a kind of indentured labour, that this cove looks like the head of a serpent, of a snake. And you can see here, this is the tank stream, which was a freshwater stream that gave them all sustenance. But if you look closely here, you can see the beginnings of an etching of a farm. So this very ordered, regulated landscape, the road to the farm, these little paddocks here. And I think for me, you can see how both the act of mapping kind of imagines this space into being and imagines where these future spaces will go, and also imagines, shingling parties, brick fields, which is still there, and also the way in which he depicts these trees as well, which are pretty, I suppose, basic. They're not very specific to any kind of tree at all. And if we look a little bit more closely now at this, so this is a really early version of a street directory. So this one is 1920, and you can see here a similar kind of articulation. So it's not just about the coloring of the image, but the equation of all parks being the same. And so here's Hyde Park where Sarah was walking, and here's Camperdown Park. And these two parks both say something, but they're quite different in terms of both their landscape and I suppose what they say about the Australian landscape generally, and what they say about how we imagine the world. So I've been thinking a lot about this. Now, moving aside all this archival contextual stuff, I'm a digital mapper by trade. So I deal in digital maps. And where a map like this is an image, I've been thinking a little bit about the way in which new maps. So these are the Sydney street directories, and I think I've got actually. If I go here, I think I've got a Gregory's from 1970. So these are the street directories that I grew up with in Australia. This is what they kind of look like. So you can see the greens are even crazier here. They're even brighter, and the blues, the yellow roads, etc. And so I've been thinking a lot about the way in which, Trove is my favorite archival source. So I've been thinking a lot about the way in which these kinds of national, very local ways of mapping are being subsumed by large global corporations like Google that don't just map a place where they are based, but map all places. And I've been feeling a fair bit of disquiet about, and it's actually as well, it's been like when I came first to Berkeley for the first time, when I came to the Bay Area a couple of years ago, for me, it felt like coming home into Google Maps. It was into the place where Google Maps makes sense. And if you look at somewhere like Sydney, and I've lived in the UK for the last 8 years, Google Maps is a total nightmare. There are no crossroads. There aren't grid patterns. There are streets that are big enough, that have ancient hedges down either side of the road. So for me, it's very much about this coming home and sort of moving, or coming to a place where Google Maps makes sense. And I think that really puts into perspective just how specific the Google Maps imaginary is, and also how diverse the world is. And so I've been thinking a lot about Google Maps and the way in which it homogenizes it. It has this new cartographic imagination that is based in digital mapping. And I suppose what I'll do next is, I was pretty excited to see that there was a new form of Google Maps. Where's Google Chrome gone? Here it is. A new form of Google Maps being built. So what they said is basically, this is 2020. So when I proposed this talk, this had just happened, which is there's a more detailed, colorful map of Google Maps. They're basically redoing the Google Map baseline, and they're using an AI to look over the satellite data, to generalize it, and to try and choose colors that are much more akin to I suppose, the landscape itself. And so as an example, this is an area, and I'll show you these images in a minute. And I'm using, these are being used by, so I started playing around first with just pre-made color extractors. So I'm using TinEye color extraction machine, which is a really great free tool that will give you a general idea of what colors are in an image. And these images are not, like, these tools aren't usually used for maps. So I'll explain that in a second. So it's been a bit of an adventure. But just to give you an idea, so this is Wanaring, a region where my aunt and uncle lived. And it's about, so the nearest town is Burke, which is about 300 kilometers away, so 3 hours. There's about 50 people who live there. And this is the map of Wanaring. And you kind of have this particular set of color palettes. But if you go to the map of Wanaring now, here it goes. I've got so many windows. Wenaring, what you have is a different kind of map. So you've got a different kind of color here. And there's Burke and Wenaring here. And so I was pretty excited by this. And I wanted to try and investigate, though, to what degree I suppose these maps are actually speaking much more specifically to landscape, or to what degree are they actually just homogenizing with a different color. And I think for me, so I think the first thing for those of you who are on the call, who are listening to this, the first thing to point out is that a digital map is not an image. It's made up of a hell of a lot of different elements. And so it looks like an image here. But if you go to the development tool, so if you go settings, whoops, wrong button, tools, so to the developer tools, you can actually see all the different components of a Google map. And what you have with a map is you have the base tiles, which are these color tiles. And then you'll have the geographic data at the top, which is the roads and the place names. And then if you wanted, you can add your own data over that. And a lot of different, I suppose, options here for trying to find the tiles. But what I wanted to do is I actually, in order to even make the image that I showed you just before, wait, where is it gone? Here, this image. In order to even make this image, I needed to be able to extract this particular image here. And so it's actually really difficult to extract the base tiles for a Google map because made of so many different things. And so for a while, I just played around with trying to find these different satellite images. And I could find some of them, but it's still a bit difficult because you can kind of see the tiles here. You kind of can't. So what I ended up doing is I found a script that actually allows you to, put this away now, to extract Google Maps tiles. So this script here, and I can, it's adapted from a Gmap downloader that I found, and I had to adjust it. So you can actually, if you run the script, so you can actually download satellite images within a certain area. So I think this is a slightly different area. And similarly, you can actually download the satellite tiles as well. Why did I close that? So you can actually see here downloading the different tiles for different areas, and you can set the zoom level as well. So that was actually a real boon in trying to get these images and to try and turn a map into an image or to find this basic data. And I think this is not, you don't ever really want to download lots of these. If I left this on all night, there'd be thousands of them. And they are Google's images, but they are useful as well for being able to analyze or get that image so that I could actually do a bit of analysis on the difference between these kinds of images or this color and the previous maps. And so what I found was this is the first set of images and this is the second set of images. And you can see this kind of pinky color. So it's actually, it is quite different. But I think, of course, at the same time, it's still pretty homogeneous. And so at first, I started playing around with imaging software that's used for medicine. So this is Fiji. I don't want these to be. And so this is the image here for this this tile here. And through Fiji, you can actually do, you can create a color inspector that shows you the colors that are in that image. And there are only 28 colors. And actually compared to the one previously, there's actually 31 colors in the earlier maps. There's actually less colors compared to the earlier version. And what I think is really interesting is that then you can do the same color inspector for the satellite image. And so where's the satellite image gone? There it is. So this is the satellite image here, and you can actually see the full range of color. And I think the problem I had with this, the suite that I was showing you, here it is, this Tin Eye Labs, is that it actually only gives you a certain number of colors. It generalizes all of the general colors into a certain number. And so I wanted to see a little bit more of those specificities of color. And I also wanted to compare a bit as well. So I actually went to a place named Tonopah, which is actually in Nevada, and wanted to compare those images as well, and those desert colors. Because I think what's interesting is that if you look at the Google Maps, the desert colors are really similar, but deserts around the place, like this idea of red dust, I mean, Australian dust is very, very red, and you can see the difference in these two satellite images. But the difference between, so this is Tonopah here, and this is Winaring, there's not such a huge difference in the colors. And I am finishing up in a second. So here's an example of the different extracted regions. So these are the two that I'm comparing here. And, you know, yes, one is more yellow and yes, one is more red, but I think this question of the cartographic imagination as a homogenizing force is still very much in effect and still very much there. And so just to end, and this is where I'm up to at the moment, and I'm really keen to hear everything that you think we can do with this or what else we can do, is I've been running a script to actually find these colors, and this one, because you can't do that in image J, this is actually really cool. And I'm in the process of making a new script as well. So you can actually run this color pixel count here. And so this is the Winaring image here. So I always write the wrong spelling of color. And what this does is give you a count of all the different colors that's available, and they give you a list of the different colors here. And if I go back to image J, you know, what you can see here is that this image has 16,208 colors that have been reduced down to 28 colors. And this image, which is the image of Tonopah, has 15,800, and it's actually quite a different array of colors. And so where I'm up to is I'm actually at the point where I'm beginning to compare these color sets and try and find ways of presenting them side by side. And I think if we ran this one, again, you can see there's 17 colors here, so there's even less colors than the other one. So this is where I'm up to. I'm going to open it up to questions and to the floor, but I think just to conclude, to head back to this question of visual imperialism, this question of, I suppose, the cartographic imagination as well. I think it's possible to say that the cartographic imagination is actually really alive and well in Google Maps, and this shift in Google Maps hasn't necessarily paid attention, like they've looked at color and they've paid attention to those satellite imagery, but at the same time, we're just examining color not from the ground up, where you're examining it from these spaces of satellite image, and when you don't understand or you're not paying attention to this question here, you're not paying attention to these arguments between, you know, a British imagination and an Australian landscape imagination, and how that is very much embedded in the way in which we map mobile, we find our way through the world, and also what we expect to see when we get there as well. And so I think using Google Maps, I'm not sure that using these red maps on the landscape necessarily address that, I think. And so, yeah, this is where I'm at. I'm basically at this point where I'm now practicing and trying to find more critical ways of attending to the color of the landscape in a way that might be able to not discount these histories and actually pay attention to them and to find ways of expressing that cartographically and expressing contextuality, of making the maps contingent and very specific. Oh, thank you. Great. Okay, so I'm going to let it go there. I'm happy to hear all of your different information, everything else you might be, I
suppose, tips you have to say. So I'm going to hand over to Greg now.
Clancy, thank you so much for sharing your work process with us. And I feel like, you know, we sort of looked into the beginning of your second book or something. And I was really generous of you to share your work this way. When I saw those two extractions in Fiji, image, they reminded me of brush strokes. And they're like two really beautiful brush strokes, you know, the redder one and the browner one and a tanner one. And that's a very strong visual. And I was wondering, two questions to get the conversation started. One is, does the breadth of those brush strokes somehow resonate with the breadth of history and layers of experiences that the land, that are associated with that land? In other words, when we reduce the colors, do we also reduce the sort of range of possibilities that in which we can see the land? That would be the first question.
Yes. Yes. And I think I don't tend to discuss it too much or go too deeply into it, because I don't want to take other people's stories, so to speak. But there's a lot of work about the role of colour in Indigenous art in Australia as well as Indigenous storytelling. So one of the oldest, I suppose, stories is the story of the rainbow serpent. And Australia is kind of understood to be this rainbow country. And I think, you know, looking at this brush stroke, I suppose that's a really beautiful way of putting it, and reducing it to something that is much more, that's not the right image, that is much more reductive and much more basic. I'm just going to keep that one there. It's a kind of violence, like it's a visual violence as well. And I think, yes, it has a cartographic purpose. Yes, it has a scientific purpose. But those purposes weren't really designed in and with Australia either. They were brought externally into these spaces and used as a part of a colonial process. And so it's not just about the erasure of the brushstrokes as a kind of color, but it's a literal erasure of the color of that land through these farming practices, through these agricultural practices, through the buildings of cities, and as Sarah said in the first video, the replacement of landscapes with ordered parks. And so, and I think it's not really accurate to say that this is just a representational or metaphoric replacement, either a metaphoric, but these colors are so embedded in that process as well. And the tensions over them, the tensions over how to color the Australian landscape. And even, I mean, a historical cartographer would also tell you about the fact that paint was expensive and pigment was difficult. So a lot of early maps didn't necessarily even have color at all. So they wouldn't even bother. And so they relied on these journal writings. And I mean, red isn't really an accurate word to describe what's happening here either. So I think, yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Of course, thanks. And an interesting extension there. I like the term of visual violence that we do when we map things and make them more Cartesian and so forth. And of course, even a satellite image doesn't really represent the landscape, because the landscape has many different day times and moods and seasons, and the satellite image is just one of the many possibilities. But of course, we can always turn on satellite images on the map. So how do you feel about our own agency in terms of looking at the map and using it in different ways, right? Like Google could say, well, if you don't like our colors, you can always just switch to satellite, and then you can see all the details you want. But probably the reason, what do you think the reason is that people mostly don't do that?
It's overwhelming. I think partly, I mean, this is where maps are really powerful, is that they do simplify.
Yeah.
The landscape is overwhelming. And it's not always useful to have a satellite image when you're trying to drive or you're trying to navigate. I think there's a cultural bias towards simplicity. But also as well, I suppose these colors are really ingrained. And they're much more experiential. I mean, the satellite images are useful for trying to get certain kinds of information, but they're not useful for what we use a lot of maps for, which isn't to look at places and spaces. We use them as tools to navigate. And so I think for me, I would argue and I think very few people, I interviewed a bunch of people as we sort of wandered around Sydney and Hong Kong, none of them used satellite at all to navigate. Although, to be fair, a lot of them didn't really use maps at all either. They used all of these different ways of wayfaring as well. So I think it is complicated.
Thank you so much. Now, at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Hala and Edgar, who have questions from our students and other participants.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Clancy, for this inspiring talk. And I'm gonna take a question from the audience, because I think you were talking about color as visual violence, and we have an anonymous attendee. The question is, could you elaborate on how these colors are a visual violence?
Yes. So I think when, in the context of Australia, the epistemological structure of the land, or how we understand space and landscape, is up for contention. And so it's not just simply about how we can use different words to describe the same thing. It's not simply a question of language and how we might depict things, but in many different spaces and different cultures, how we understand who owns the land, how we talk about who gets to be on the land, how we talk about what belongs to the land is bound up, like these sort of epistemological structures, these ways of knowing landscape. And I don't want to essentialize, but there are examples, for instance, the question of land ownership, this idea that people may own land rather than, for instance, be custodians of it or look after it. And the way in which those land claims are being made in really early maps. So the first map, you already see this claim of ownership or the right to be there being made in these early maps. So these agricultural, I think, here. So these agricultural kinds of depictions of settlement, etc. And the way in which they're naturalized through color, water is blue, land is green. These are very British pastoral kinds of environments. And I suppose they are assumed as being axiomatic. And this becomes really difficult when you need to then make an argument that for some Indigenous groups, no one owns the land. That the land owns itself. The land is not an ownership. There is no ownership structure. Territories understood to be different. And so these epistemological structures actually don't map on to this kind of cartography particularly well. And it kind of relates, there's another question here as well about these sort of non-settler sort of starting points as well. And so I think there's a lot of discussion as well in Australia around songlines, and a book by British anthropologist Bruce Chatwin that describes songlines. And I think it's quite interesting that often people talk about the line element of these songlines. And Marsha Langton, who's an Aboriginal Australian academic, says pretty forcefully that they're not lines per se, they're songs. And these songs were used to describe landscape. They were used to describe and tell stories that were then used as kinds of maps that people would use to then navigate. And so it's not even a visual, it's much more descriptive. And it wasn't even just in the communication of words, but also in tones, in how long certain notes would be held. You could kind of sing this landscape. And these songs would describe a particular area where those people lived. And they would actually match up and meet up to songs. And they have found these song lines, or these sort of lines of songs match up for like thousands of kilometers all up and down the coast, the center of Australia, etc. And so I think the visual itself in this colonial context is already a kind of violence. And that I find it interesting, I'm not sure how familiar you are with Eddie Mabo. So this was a native title claim that needed to be said. And so Eddie Mabo was from the Torres Strait Island, where they did have systems of land ownership. And he, I'm not sure if it's going to be here. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to be here. I might have to Google it. He submitted a map to the High Court of Australia, this map here, as part of his native title claim. And in order to actually get any kind of recognition that Indigenous people or Aboriginal people and the Torres Strait Islanders had a territorial right to their land, they had to map it in this very particular kind of way and present it like this. And I think, again, this question of visual violence it's not just about the color, it's not just about the image itself, but it's about an epistemological struggle over how we depict space itself, how we depict geography, how we think about it. And a final point I'll sort of say on that as well is even this question of north. So the Yolngu people in Northern Australia actually don't have words for north and south. Sorry, they don't have words for left and right. And so as they move through space, and I think arguably this is probably, people have contended this is why they're very good at finding their way around. They won't refer to their left hand or their right hand. They'll be referring to their north hand or their south hand. And when they move, those descriptions change. And I think this is really powerful as well, because it again reminds us that this egocentric idea of the self isn't even, like, that is up for contention. Left and right itself is up for contention. And when we're talking about real issues like this and the fact that we still have these conversations over maps, I think it is a kind of violence because it's still based in a very, the Queen is still Australia's head of state. And so these images of land claims and the colors that we use, I mean, are still based in this epistemological war over how we represent the land. So therefore, who gets to be on it? Who gets the rights to those histories as well?
Thank you so much, Clancy. Your lecture is so powerful and your work you're doing is so crucial. So thank you. I'm gonna move it to Edgar.
Yeah, oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Clancy. I'm receiving so much from this lecture, really appreciating it. And so I have a question here from one of our students, Savannah Adamo asks, how do the maps of the US compare to those of other countries in terms of their influences or biases? And how do you predict the future will continue to change maps?
Yeah, okay. So small caveat, I'm a critical cartographer, not a historical cartographer. So if anyone on this call is a historical cartographer, I'm very sorry for generalizing. Maps, I mean, it depends what a map was being made for. It depends when a map was being made, and it depends who was making the map. And so one of the reasons I looked at Sydney and Hong Kong specifically is because they were both cities that were being built at very similar times as part of a British imperial project. So that is the beginning of the 19th century. And the maps that were there were a lot of hydrographic maps, which were really common around the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. And so, you know, if you're making a map of an area that you're going to colonize, and it's a little bit different to perhaps imperial or territorial maps that are based in contiguous territory, so many maps start with the sea. So they start with sounding depths of the bay. They start with these little numbers everywhere. So they're trying to figure out how big their ships can be in, and then they start with the coastline. And so if you look at Lieutenant Cook's maps up the east coast of Australia, which were then used by La Perouse, the French explorer who then used those maps to travel, and the descriptions of those landscapes that William Bradley used, you get this kind of repetition of the coast and of this site of entry, these ports of entry, and then the maps begin to unfold into the interior. And these are really specific of colonial maps. And in a way, there's a great book by Suvendrini Pereira called maybe Australia and the Insular Imagination. I'll put it in the chat where she discusses this in Australia. But I think when you compare it to US maps, and so, you know, obviously the colonization process within the US started much earlier, but you still have this whole question of the westward expansion as well. You still have this scary kind of interior. And actually though, French colonial maps, British colonial maps, Spanish colonial maps were pretty similar in a lot of ways. They still had these particular epistemological structures. And I think, you know, I write in my book a lot about a big shift that happens during the Enlightenment era, where mapping stops being something that's descriptive and I suppose religious, and starts becoming this scientific, precise endeavor that's based in a certain kind of rationalism, that's based in Cartesian geometries, that sees the world as somehow being inherently ordered, and a map's job is to really bring that out and to explain that. And so when you look at these kinds of histories of American mapping, I mean, go and look at the maps. You do see similar things that you see in Sydney when you look at like the urban maps or the planning maps. So the town of Savannah, for instance, or Chicago, if you look at the maps where people are doing subdivisions, they're very, very similar. But the very, very early maps from the 17th century are a little bit different.
Yeah, thank you so much, Clancy.
I think we can take one more question from the audience. Is Alex still with us? Alex Soham?
Yep, I think she's live.
Hi.
Amazing.
Hello. Can you
Hey,
hear me?
Alex.
Hello. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks, Clancy, for your talk. I loved it. I guess I'm just gonna read my question that I wrote. And I was just thinking how interesting it is to think as maps, not only as a representation, but as a technology as well, in the sense that they're making a space symbolically legible, accountable, and orderly that can be then better exploited, not just in traditional colonial terms like you were explaining, but also contemporary imperialism, of course. And I was thinking a lot about how Jason Moore talks about maps as being the main technology of the Industrial Revolution, instead of thinking of the steam engine, think of something quite innocuous at first. But perhaps a better way of thinking about this is to say that maps make an abstraction of matter so we can measure it and count it and make comparisons or sameness, as you were showing us with the different colors in the desert, in order to monetize it, essentially. And so I wonder what the role of changing the way we represent the colors of the earth may change the relation we have with it. And you were already talking a little bit about it. So beyond just thinking about the historical role that maps have had in the development of capitalism, I guess I'm interested in seeing what is the power and the responsibility of representation in technological capitalism.
Yeah, I think I'm hesitant to be a technological determinist. I think there's a lot of ways in which we can think about technologies as being really optimistic and emancipatory, and finding really interesting ways of, I suppose, describing the world. And I think technological capitalism, it's the interoperability between the numeric. So this, the idea that with the Cartesian grid, you can suddenly join, like all points in a space can have a number, or a set of 2 numbers or 3 numbers if you want to be volumetric about it, 4. And that from that you can make calculations, but it also means that if there's money, if money has numbers, like if currency has numbers, then that can also be linked as well. And I think, again, in my book, I write a lot about the kind of newfound interoperability with Leibnizian systems of describing and measuring matter as well. And so suddenly matter can be numerated, we can be measured, we can be counted. I think for me, the question of color starts at the question of classification. So before we can even count, before we have this mathematical or mathesis kind of structure, we have to ask this question of, well, what do we count? Like what objects are we looking at here? And do we see landscape as territory? Do we see landscape as something that we move through? Or do we see landscape as something that is more vibrant, of something that's a little bit more unexpected? And I think, I think there's sort of 2 examples that I find kind of interesting. And back to Australia, I find the Australian continent quite interesting because it's just very strange. And the first is the Australian continent moves quite quickly northwards. They have to constantly reposition the continental plate, like on their maps, and sort of make sure that it's all lined up. And they discovered this when they were starting to test driverless cars, which were using GPS devices. And it turned out that even though the car's GPS devices were correct, the earth underneath it wasn't, it was moving. And so they had to kind of redo it. And I think the second thing is when Volvo decided to test their driverless cars in the Australian desert. They'd kind of done a lot of their sensing technology based upon large animals, I think like elk or moose. And, with a sensor, you send out a sensor, it comes back, you send it out, you're kind of constantly pinging to see something. And from that, you can predict a trajectory through space. You can see a moose moving like this, or you can see a horse. But in the desert, they encountered the kangaroo, which is a really unusual animal. It's interesting to read description of it, because the way it jumps backwards and forwards, side to side. It doesn't move in this linear fashion, and it goes everywhere. And the cars just freaked out because they couldn't, like, the kangaroo was there for one ping, and then suddenly it was gone. And then suddenly it was there again, and then suddenly it was gone because they bounced so high, their distance changed. And they actually had to send a whole team to Australia to try and figure out how to measure this kangaroo, how to turn it into something that could be numerated so the car could understand. So I think for me, these questions like, what role does technological capitalism have? Well, what if I was a technological capitalist, what I would have hoped to have learned from this is that actually our ability to capture the world in numbers is really limited. That we're constantly finding things at those limits, and we shouldn't be hubristic about how much we can do. But instead, of course, I think technological capitalism sees it as a challenge to quantify everything. And these are just more and more fringes of the world that we haven't yet conquered yet. So I think for me, I think it's really problematic, and I think it's, you know, really destructive.
Thank you so much, Clancy. This is a sad note to end on, but sometimes, you know, in order to make the world a better place, we come on these sad notes and then need to figure out how to make things work better. Brandon Panaligan.
Yes, I wanted to answer that question. Yeah.
Oh, okay. You want to answer that quickly?
Just very, very quickly, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to mention that is a fabulous question, and let's end it on that. And then thank you so much. Okay, onwards.
Yeah. Yes, Brandon, you're absolutely right. And I think it's difficult because in some ways, within Australia, there are these kind of clear moments of incursion.
Sorry, Clancy, you should state what the question is because not everybody can.
Oh, sorry.
See. Yeah.
I'm sorry. The question is, how would you respond to the suggestion that there's a fantastical romanticization or romanticism to the way scholars speak about First Nations and Aboriginal conceptions of property rights and concepts of territory? These days, we tend to write about these groups as if they were static, pure, and innocent before the colonists arrived. But couldn't one argue that in the centuries before conquerors came, the territories were often under dispute between native peoples, Lakota versus Omaha, Aztec versus Maya, borders have never been settled, and there's always competition for space and resources? Yes, you could dispute that, or you could argue that. And I think it very much depends on what spaces, what peoples, what groups, what territories you're talking about. And I think, you know, in the case of Australia, like there is this, it's difficult because in some ways there are these very clear moments, like there are dates of incursion that we can understand that basically people came and they did something and something changed. And the 26th of January, 1788, something changed. People began to settle in this space. And I think the question of romanticization or romanticism around how Indigenous groups were before is also followed through to this romanticism about how Indigenous groups are now, and how we might see them as like people as unified or as atechnological or somehow traditional. And I think a really great presentation by Corinna Grant through the Berkeley Center for New Media, you know, she always takes pains to remind us that when we think about the Ohlone people, that you need to remember that they are still here and that they are people who have iPhones, etc. And I think the same goes for a lot of Aboriginal Australians. Aboriginal Australians are by far an urban peoples. You know, they're by far represented in cities. And Aboriginal people is not even a term that really makes a lot of sense because there are so many different groups of people and so many different nations and different peoples within those nations. And I think, you know, I think there is this tendency, but at the same time, there are also very clearly defined spatial epistemologies that come from a European history of colonialism, which maybe don't, you know, depending on which groups of people you're looking at, result in different kinds of colonialism. And I think this is why I talk very specifically about Australia. I talk very specifically about Sydney as well, because you know, the Eora people are still there to some degree, but you know, I think it is, and I mean, in Australia as well, it's difficult because we rely very much on oral histories as well. So sort of histories that are told from person to person to person. And if you're interested in Australian, there's sort of discussion over this in Australia. If you look up the history wars and there's discussion over what we can view as a true history. And there's also a really a neat book. There's two books actually, one by Tyson Yunker Porter that talks about sort of Indigenous yarning, and another is Bruce Pascoe's Dark Emu as well. And I'll put those in the chat, or I'll give them to Greg to put onto wherever this goes. But yeah, and I'm not going to talk too much because I'm not too confident speaking about North American Native, like First Nations people, because that's not my area of expertise. I'm much more based in the South Pacific in Australia and New Zealand.
Well, okay. Well, let's end there because our time is up and it's late in London, I guess. And we really all are deeply, I think, thinking about what you shared with us. And I really appreciate the sense of knowledge and also not knowledge that you shared, that you clearly stated where your expertise lies and where it doesn't. That is such a rare thing to do for a scholar. And I truly appreciate that. As a colleague. Thank you so much for being there with us, and we'll send you the results of our work here and share them with you, and really thank you for a wonderful talk.
Thank you. It was fantastic.
So,
if you've got questions that you've asked for and I haven't answered, just email me and I will answer them all. And critiques, anything, I'm not precious. I'm happy to hear critique and help and anything. So please, yeah, just email me.
Will do. Thank you so much, Clancy, and lots of
Thank
applause.
you so much, Greg.
You get tons of thank yous in the chat there, which is a wonderful way of sharing applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
See you later.
Thank you, Hala.
Bye.
Thank you, Edgar. Thank you, Paris. And thanks, Everdeen, for transcribing everything as well. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.